Our first panel is called Justice for All, and I'm pleased to ask our panel sponsor, Royce Schwinn, President and CEO of Destination Vancouver, to introduce the session and our moderator. Royce?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Jess and Clint, for your words this morning. And on behalf of all of us at Destination Vancouver and our tourism partners, I want to thank SOS for pulling this forum together this morning. Like everyone here, we know that today's topics, the moderators and panelists will provide a tremendous focus on some incredibly serious topics. And there's no question that public safety is top of mind for every British Columbian. And at Destination Vancouver, it is an important part of our international brand as we welcome visitors from around the world to our region. It's unfortunate to say that because of the issues that we've had, we do have international sellers who sell Vancouver who have stopped selling Chinatown and Gastown because they are concerned about liability for their business and risk for their travelers, so they do not represent us any longer. Today's first panel is called Justice for All and deals with the capacity of our judicial system to connect public expectations with courtroom realities. Our moderator today is Jas Johal, host of the Jas Johal Show on CKNW. Jas is a voice and a face known to all of us, and his experience as an international television reporter, member of the provincial legislature, and now host of his own show gives him a unique perspective on both public safety and our judicial system. Please join me in welcoming Jas Johal and his panelists.
Royce, thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the SOS Communities Driving Change Forum. Public safety and crime, obviously, as our speakers this morning have already stated, are the issue number one. I certainly hear it on my program, we hear it on CKNW, and of course you see it on your television screens on a weekly basis, from small businesses, of course, struggling with break-ins to families feeling unsafe in their own communities. As Jess has also mentioned, the polling that you see from SOS over the last few months is startling. It's not something we expected to be talking about this probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. But it is a growing issue and it's an important issue. So I thank all of you for being here, number one, from throughout British Columbia. And like Jess, I have Caribou roots as well. So good to see so many faces coming in from the interior as well. Now this panel, of course, will tackle the hard questions about what's happening in BC communities and explore reforms and actions needed to rebuild public confidence. Before I begin, I also want you to, at the back of your program, I want you to know that there is this little message here. It's a Slido. So if you have a question that perhaps I'm not asking and you wish to have addressed, please download this onto your phone, ask the question. It'll come straight to this iPad next to me, and I will be asking some of those questions of our panelists near the tail end of our conversation. I want to introduce our panelists, and what I'm going to do is introduce them first, and afterwards ask each one, just for 1 minute, just the first opening remarks in regards to how they see the world, some of the challenges that they see before us. First, a name and face known to all of us here, the Honourable Wally Oppal, a former Supreme Court Justice, a former MLA and Attorney General, and currently a Senior Counsel with Broughton Law. To Wally's left is Adam Dalrymple, President of the BC Crown Counsel Association, that represents our province's Crown prosecutors. And to the left of Adam is Christina Cook, Senior Policy Lawyer with the BC First Nations Justice Council. And to the left of Christina is Mayor Leonard Krogh from Nanaimo, who was a member of the legislature for 13 years before becoming mayor of Nanaimo. So, well, let me start with you first and foremost. Just a brief minute in regards to where you see where we are in regards to this challenge that we have before us, and some of the issues you wish to address today. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Jed, and thank you for organizing this, and particularly thanks to Jess and Norman Stowe for doing this. You know, the first one of these inquiries that I was involved in was in 1992 to 1994, and we recommended at that time there should be some form of community-based policing. That means getting the communities involved in public safety and issues of that sort. And because the police cannot do these functions alone, they need help. So we need a decentralized type of policing where the community is involved and communities are give their priorities. Having said that, I watched the video here wherein there was a lot of discontent, anger, a lot of it directed at the courts, and I'm not here to defend the courts, but I can tell you that we in the justice system, while we take the brunt of the blame and the discontent that's taking place out there, we see the crimes after they've been committed. You know, I was a special prosecutor. I prosecuted over 50 homicide cases. I heard at least that many and when I was on the Supreme Court, the trial court. And we deal with these things after the crimes have been committed, after there's been victimization. So the focus we not to get into is let's start getting into promotion. This is a community-based effort. If we want to tackle crime and we want to get to community that are crime-free or minimal criminal activity, we have to start dealing with the kids who are dysfunctional, the kids who don't have the education, the indigenous communities that we've neglected all these years, and we have to start educating them, and we have to start dealing with their addictions. You know, the people who rob banks don't have PhDs. So we have to start getting at the root causes of all of that before we start getting into the end results. We're at the back end of the criminal justice system, as I said a moment ago, after the crimes have been committed. So I'm so pleased that there are so many people here who have the voices of the community and who are here to give us their input as to what ought to be done. But this is not a simple issue. It's been going on for a long time, as the speakers have said, and so it requires a community-based response where everybody is involved. So.
Wally, thank you. Adam, a brief minute in regards to just some opening remarks from you in regards to this.
Thank you, Jazz. So I am the president of the BC Crown Council Association. We've been around since about 1991, but a couple of years ago, we decided that we wanted to move beyond simply, grievances and bargaining and contracts, and we wanted to give a voice to the 550 so frontline Crown Council criminal prosecutors that are fighting it out in the courtrooms of this province, fighting to keep you safe, fighting to uphold the rule of law. And so we're here to contribute to this conversation. We're very honored to be here. We hope that we can help find solutions. I have been traveling the province. I have been to Fort St. John, to Cranbrook, to Colwood, up the coast to Prince Rupert. I've seen and talked to some of you. We're here to listen. We're here to offer insight into your justice system. And like I said, offer some solutions. I echo what the former Attorney General has said, that, I believe the solutions are community-based. We talk about community-based policing, what about community-based prosecutions? And one of the concepts we're going to be talking to you about is prosecution strength. What is the prosecution strength in your community? How many prosecutors do you have working? Has that increased with population? And we know that population growth contributes to crime. We want to make sure that our members, your prosecutors, have the tools to protect you and to uphold the rule of law in this province. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Let's go to Christina next.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start out by introducing myself. Bozuanin, Indigenous Christina Cook, Ndonjiba Baskanwani Zibi. Hello, my name is Christina Cook. I'm an Anishinaabe and a member of Broken Head Ojibwe Nation, signatory to Treaty Number 1 in Manitoba, senior policy lawyer with the BC First Nations Justice Council, and we are so pleased to be on this panel and invited to this dialogue section today. At the BC First Nations Justice Council, we see the issues with community safety as tied inherently with wellness. We believe that when our communities are well, that our communities are safe. So one of the fundamental principles in our BC First Nations justice strategy is the principle of diverting people outside of the criminal justice system where they can work on their wellness and where they can work on restoring balance within their communities. In looking at the different opportunities that are available, we have opened up 15 Indigenous Justice Centers across British Columbia where we provide legal representation as well as wraparound services. And we hope today to share some information about the work that we're doing, as well as hear from community members as to what you would like to see moving forward for community safety in your community. Thank you.
Christina, thank you. Leonard?
Good morning, everyone. Very honored to be here. Nice to see so many former faces from the BC legislature and still active in the community. Look, I'm not going to say anything I haven't been saying for 5 years. We are in the midst of a mental health, addictions, trauma, and brain injury crisis. It manifests itself in homelessness and the petty crime associated with dealing with your drug addiction. It is not going to get better with the criminal justice system and the health system not working in conjunction. The fact is, we have a number of individuals in the severe cases who should either be in jail because of the nature of the criminal activity and probably getting some kind of care and treatment, and we have a number of individuals who should be in the healthcare system who are committing crimes who no one gets to touch. That's my perspective as a small town mayor, relatively small, seeing what happens in our streets. And that is the frustrating part. I can tell you, as a mayor of a community, it is the biggest single source of complaint and concern expressed to me. It's not about water or sewer or garbage or parks or all the things that I should be worried about and working on. This is where we're at. And so we are leaving, either directly through intention or indirectly through inaction, people in that middle category who I say are committing acts that all of us would regard as criminal if they had capacity and would be adjudged as such, and if Wally was on the bench, would be sending them to jail if they had capacity. And you've got a bunch of folks who are so deep in their mental health and addiction and trauma and brain injury issues with the growing number of brain injury cases that the healthcare system isn't keeping them in secure and voluntary care where they need to be until they can either get better or function independently someplace else. So on this panel, from my perspective, as someone who did a little bit of criminal work in the old days, it's that intersection where we're failing to treat the people who are causing the social disorder, who are living their lives of greatest misery on our streets and causing the greatest level of concern for society and driving away tourists. So I'll come back to our introduction.
Thank you so much, Leonard. Thank you to all our panelists. Lots to talk about here. Let me start with you first, Walter. You had mentioned in your opening remarks about somebody committing a crime, and the judge or the justice system is the last entity that actually deals with these individuals. I would also argue, since you are the last entity, that's where people also want, citizens want to see accountability, right? So when it comes to keeping repeat offenders off our streets, do we need better laws from the federal government, or is it just better enforcement of those laws from our provincial judges?
There's nothing wrong with the laws. The laws are there. We have to implement those laws. The one area that people complain about are the bail laws. We got to toughen up our bail laws. Well, 75% of the people who are in custody in Canada now are there because they didn't make bail. And some of them are there for a year and a half. Some of them will be acquitted. What do you tell those people who spend a year and a half in custody and then we find out there was not enough evidence to convict them? So sorry for taking up your life? So the bail laws are there, and that requires a response. So Adam knows this as well as I do, and that is that the police go to the Crown, they write their report, and the Crown then takes the position of whether or not a particular person ought to be detained or ought to be released. So, the judge then has an obligation. Under our criminal code, the onus is on the Crown to decide whether or not somebody ought to be detained. Keep in mind that the person who's there is innocent. No crime has been committed. So under the democratic system, the judge can only keep a person in jail if, one, the person's not going to appear for trial, there aren't too many of those. Secondly, and most of all, is there a substantial likelihood that that person will commit crimes if released? So the judge has this weighing factor to do. And at the back of every judge's mind is the person still is innocent. And so we have to be careful before we detain them. We can do what the Americans do, keep somebody in jail, have wrongful convictions, and worry about that later on. Let's get tough, but not necessarily
So,
get
I want
smart.
to just jump in, and sorry, Wally. You were saying that if a judge feels that somebody's going to be a repeat offender, they can keep him inside. Yeah. We hear from people here, we heard on the videos there, repeat offender after repeat offender, repeat offender. These individuals, it's the same individuals, and I've heard that from retailers on Robson Street, literally people moving store by store, ripping them off. So why do we continue to hear these stories of repeat offenders doing what they're doing and they're not in jail? If we're seeing this, why aren't the judges seeing that then?
Well, the judges are qualified people. They have to weigh the factors. So if a defense lawyer comes before a judge and said, look, this person is addicted and it won't serve the public interest by putting that person in custody, so they release him. And they're not always right. And the answer is, an easy answer is, let's keep everybody in jail. That way, we won't have to worry about people going in and out and the so-called revolving door. The fact is that it's difficult sometimes to predict human behavior. So are there mistakes made? Yes. And because human behavior being what it is. So the judges have a difficult job in determining who ought to be released, who should be kept in custody. It's the Crown to prove that that person shouldn't be released because that person is a public hazard. So, yes, there are mistakes that are being made, and I think that we all need to work harder, and the Crown is the strongest point here. The Crown relies on police reports, and some of those people that are released by the police in the first instance. So, yes, you could keep people in custody. The focus is always to try and treat them, to see whether or not we can cut out the repeat offenders. And I'm not going to come here and tell you that mistakes haven't been made. We've heard ample evidence here to indicate that there have been made. So you have a system where there's a presumption of innocence, where we guard against wrongful convictions and the wrongful detaining of people who will be ultimately found innocent.
Adam, jump in here just for a moment. I'm very interested, if a police officer is handing you a report that this person's a repeat offender, in most cases, is that person going to get convicted at the end of the day? And that's what Wally is saying. And secondly, is it the quality? I mean, I think we have a great police force in this city, great police forces, and around this province. The quality of reports, I'm going to assume, are going to be very good. Why are we not seeing some of those convictions?
Why are we not seeing...
I'm going to Adam. Let's go to Adam.
Go to the Crown.
Yes, thanks, Jazz. And again, I'm going to preface my comments. I don't speak for the BC Prosecution Service. I'm speaking for the Crown Counsel Association. I do want to follow up on one comment first. So first, the former AG is right. There is the primary and secondary ground. There's also a tertiary ground. Some people refer to it as the residual ground, which is, maintaining the confidence in the criminal justice system. That is another legitimate and independent ground to detain an individual. I also want to talk about REVOI, which is the Repeat Violent Offender Intervention Initiative, launched by the current government. And I just spoke to one of our prosecutors who's on that team yesterday and got some information from them. And what they told me is that they would say probably 80% or more of the people that they ask for that's on that program are detained. The issue is that the criteria to be on that program is so limited. It's really driven by, as I understand it, community corrections. Some police agencies are involved in different regions, others aren't. And when I travel the province and speak to police, to prosecutors, they're shocked by some of what they would describe as the chronic offenders in their community who are not captured by that program. And that program, it does work, because what it does is it reduces the ratio of Crown to offenders. It gives those prosecutors the time to dig in on those offenders, know the background, obtain transcripts. records, all of that information that's relevant to a bail hearing so that a judge can make the right decision. And so much about a bail hearing now is about giving that judge all of the information that they need. And what I've heard from some prosecutors is that because of the workload, because the regular stream of people that are coming through the bail courts, not part of the Revoy, those prosecutors are overworked. They don't have enough resources. They are triaging. They are running skinny bail hearings to get through the list because there's just more and more coming. And we need to reduce those ratios. We need to make sure that we give those prosecutors the resources, that we give them the time to dig in on these files, to make quality and compelling submissions to a judge so that they can do what's appropriate. And one other thing that we're arguing for is for a national bail repository of information. This province has a system called Justin. It's good. It was ahead of its time, but it's not integrated with any of the other systems across the province. And there are offenders that are moving, coming in from Calgary, coming in from other provinces, where there's relevant information that would detain someone. For example, outstanding warrants, conditions of bail that they're breaching. That kind of information is so important to a judge who's going to make the call on whether someone is going to commit new offenses in the community or is a risk to the community or is not going to come to court. And we're advocating for that, and we need your support.
And just at the tail end, fair to say, what you're saying is the system is underfunded right now in regards to, when you're saying you're triaging, I don't want to hear that, but nobody else wants to hear that, but that's what you're saying.
Our frontline prosecutors are feeling triaged. And when we talk about, yes, there are people that will be held in custody that may be acquitted, how do we make sure that those people have access to a trial faster, that they get before a judge, they get the time in the courtroom to have their case heard? It's in all of our interests for innocent people who have not committed crimes to be acquitted. And it's also in our interest for people who have been committed crimes be convicted and be done in a timely fashion. And when there's delays in the system and it's not properly resourced, you have people sitting in detention centers in bail for months on end waiting for their court date. And we all know generally, longer files take to get to court. The Crown's case weakens. It's in everyone's interest to get that into a courtroom fast and quick so a decision can be made.
Thank you so much. I have a question here. I'm going to...
I just want to jump in on it. I think you've got to focus on what I'll call two separate classes of criminals. There are those that are extremely violent and dangerous as a result of either severe addiction or brain injury or some kind of trauma that led to this, severe mental health issues. There are two, the public perceives, whether it's true or not here to argue facts and numbers, the public perceives that too many of those people are on the street, not getting any care, not getting any support, and creating a danger to themselves and certainly to the public. And then there are other repeat offenders that, with great respect, go into the London drugs downtown that I worry about losing as the mayor of the city when we're trying to concentrate a population in our downtown core, that go into London drugs repeatedly, feeding an addiction, who are uncaring about whether they're picked up, charged, or not charged the minute they go into the court. They're released. It's not a serious crime. It's just a minor property offense. Who cares if it's the 15th or 20th? I'll tell you who cares. The citizens care because they see it and they don't like it. The businesses get upset by it. The people who work in those stores and are trying to make a living are upset by it. And that's the frustration that's growing here. And this is where the justice system in and of itself, with great respect and bail, can't fix this, because if you take those people in and then you release them into the streets, or they don't spend enough time in jail to get into a program because the nature of the crime isn't severe enough to warrant a lengthy sentence, they don't get any better, and this thing repeats, and we now have a concentration of this in our society brought about by the toxicity of the drug supply, the level of brain injury that's occurring because people are being brought back with naloxone and are worse off than when they took the drug in the first place. So that's where I come back to my point around the interplay between the healthcare system and the justice system, and why you can't blame the courts particularly, you can't blame Crown Counsel, you can't blame the police, you can't blame the healthcare system in and of itself. But if you don't get those things working together, people will continue to repeat those offenses that are driving all of us nuts.
So I go back to my same question then, Leonard. Is this just about dollars then? It's just more money for healthcare, more money for our prosecutors. And yes, we're talking about interconnectedness, and I get that. But all of this, underlying all of this, is just not enough resources for all of this.
It's not just about dollars. Any of us, we're all lawyers up in the front here. We've all known for years that the majority of people in the criminal justice system have an identifiable addiction and or mental health issue. I see the former Attorney General, for whom I have great respect and used to spar with, nodding his head. So why has it taken us so long to get to the point where we are prepared to recognize this? And I think we've recognized it, and the level of applause I'm getting here tells me that it's not because of my pretty face. It's because I'm speaking for what people on the street think and feel. So for God's sakes, it's not just about money, but it's about recognizing that you have to deal with it as that combination of issues. Criminalizing people, putting someone in jail who's got fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, who came from a horrible family, is not going to fix them unless they can get treatment and care, and in some cases, as I say, secure care.
Well, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, you've been at the hit. I fully agree with you, Leonard, because the judge who hears this case finds out that the person is mentally ill, the person never received any help, has grown up in squalid circumstances, no counseling, now is before the courts. So what's a judge supposed to do? The judge doesn't want to send addicted people to jail because that person will come out and he's going to commit crimes all over again. So we need to get into the treatment. Mental illness is a major factor. Drug addiction is a major factor in our society. We have to start working at the back end and at the front end. We are at the back end when all of this has already taken place. And I agree with you fully that the public is tired of this, and I don't blame them, of seeing people who are mentally ill, who are on the street, addicted, and they're committing further crimes, often property crimes, and now crimes of violence.
Christina, across Canada, and sorry, Adam, I'll get to you just in a moment here. Across Canada, Indigenous people are overrepresented in the correction system. How do we change that, number one? And how do we better address some of the challenges there? Because that's one of the issues that we haven't really focused on. Walk me through what you think should be done in regards to just helping our Indigenous communities, because they are so disproportionately represented in our correction system and the justice system.
Happy to speak to that. And actually, the BC First Nations, the 204 First Nations, have come together to draft a 25-point strategy in dealing with the overrepresentation of Indigenous people within the criminal justice system in British Columbia. But if I could divert a little bit and speak to Mayor Kong's point, I think he addresses an important issue, that it's not just merely, further funding or throwing money at the problem. It costs a lot of money to house people. So, incarcerating people prior to trial and prior to conviction, I think is potentially counterintuitive. One of the principles that we have in our strategy is the principle of diversion, is diverting people out of the criminal justice system where their issues are not going to be addressed adequately by the criminal justice system or incarceration. We're creating a diversion center in Prince George right now that is going to deal with sustenance crime, and the small petty crime issues that are a product of homelessness, that are a product of addictions, a product of mental health, where we work with the RCMP in Prince George, where we work with community services in Prince George to address these small property type crimes and help people get into treatment, get the health care that they need, and get the housing that they need. And I think it's those type of solutions and those type of programs that can address some of this more repeat sustenance, homelessness problems that are not being addressed and that are popping up in many communities. We're starting with Prince George at the moment, but hopefully, this diversion program will be successful and will be replicated in other communities.
Thank you so much, Adam. You want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just want to build on what's been said here. There is a model in this province for dealing with some of these issues, that intersection of healthcare and criminal justice, and that what I would argue is the downtown community court, the community court model that was set up by Mr. Opal and others. I worked in that courthouse. I worked there for a few years. I saw how we brought together all these existing agencies, all the infrastructure that's already out there, working together to address the underlying sort of criminogenic factors of crime. When people come into custody, you had a police officer, you had a housing specialist with BC Housing, you had community corrections, you had Duty Council Crown, and we're all looking at this person, getting a snapshot of where they are and saying, what are their issues? We have a collateral information screen. We know if they've been in the hospital recently, what their mental health issues, are they on bail, do they have outstanding warrants? And we have a picture of this person, and we all work together to figure out how do we end this criminal cycle together. And I think by and large, there was a great deal of success. We had mental health programs, we had case management team, we had a chronic offender program, all of those things that were there. And, I talked to Tom Gove about this. He was one of the judges there, all of these resources exist in most of the communities in this province. It's just reorienting and reorganizing existing services, organization, agencies to serve these communities.
I'm going to jump in and say Adam's point is very well taken. I toured that court twice in my former life, and it's very successful. But you also have to factor in that today, because of the toxicity of the drug supply, because of the nature of what's happening in the streets, the level of brain injury is not something we can continue to sort of ignore. That program worked well when we weren't overwhelmed with numbers. The numbers now on the streets, the people who are homeless, addicted, brain injured in particular, and I keep emphasizing that, are more significant than they've ever been. So yes, that's a great system if you've got the resources, but in the short term, what are we going to do about the numbers? Because the numbers are the scary part.
Well, I think we established the community court in 2008 when I was the Attorney General. We looked at the New York model. In New York, they brought it in a huge way. So they found out that 90% of the people who commit property crimes are either homeless, mentally ill, addicted, or of that sort of person. So we thought the best thing to do is see if we can treat them, find a solution for their other problems. And as Adam has said, it's worked fairly well because the criminal justice system has been working in silos where the police are over here, the Crown's here, and the judges are over here. So we have to put all of this stuff together. And Leonard's absolutely right. The mentally ill people have to be treated, and they have to be treated so much that they don't become repeat offenders. As I said at the outset of my remarks, we see all of this happening in the courts after the crime has been committed. So the solution is to prevent that crime from being committed at the outset.
Picking up on what you just said, Wally and Leonard, as well, is a question from someone called Tired of Being Scared from the slide there. And I want to address this to Leonard. Has public sentiment moved sufficiently such that the BC government can enable the police to forcibly remove people from the streets and put them in secure care, in your mind?
Look, I've been calling for secure and voluntary care in appropriate cases for a long time. I'm not a physician, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not the person to make those judgment calls, and it has to be used sparingly. Taking someone's liberty away is a really terrible thing to do. But there is no question there are more individuals in our streets now who require secure and voluntary care, who are not going to get better being sentenced to jail for 6 months or a year. They're not going to get into a detox program. They're not going to get into a treatment program. They're not going to get the kind of access they need to long-term psychiatric care or therapy. There are folks, and they cause and create, I would suggest with respect, a great deal of mayhem way beyond what their numbers warrant. When you've had to listen, as I've had to listen, as some of the other politicians here have had to listen to the parents, the children, the spouses, the whoever's of these people, they're not happy. The public isn't happy. Nobody's happy. So if nobody's happy, why can't we decide that perhaps sometimes in appropriate cases, being in secure care is where you should be and hopefully get better, and if you can't, you know what? There was a time when we understood that some people would be looking at permanent care because of the nature of whatever's happened to them. And as I emphasize again, I like to repeat myself, just like I did in court, very annoying, the level of brain injury has to be recognized now. It is not this is not the same as it was 50 or 60 years ago.
Christina, you want to jump in regards to secure care, your thoughts?
My thoughts on secure care, and I just want to preface, I'm speaking for myself and not on behalf of the Justice Council, because I'm not sure that we have a public position at this moment, is that I think logistically, it will be very difficult and very expensive in order to facilitate the required checks and balances that you're going to need to ensure that people's charter rights are protected, that standards are implemented to ensure that it's only in the most severe cases, that you have the interplay between the justice system plus the health system, is going to make this program quite costly. And I'm not sure that it's going to provide an immediate solution or a timely solution that is required in a lot of our communities right now. And so, you know, to borrow a phrase from my friend, to repeat myself, I think a more immediate solution is further resources and further community coordination for diversion, for diverting people and getting them care and treatment at the time that they need it, and not at the end of their criminal justice process at sentencing. Work with people at, you know, the time that they're in crisis, to help them with their housing issues, to help them with their health issues, their addiction issues, so that by the time they get to sentencing, should, you know, they be facing criminal charges, that they're already at a healing plan, that they're already at a point in their healing journey, that they're no longer a danger of reoffending and no longer a danger to society. So, you know, I'm hesitant to say, you know, full stop no to the issue of involuntary care, but just logistically, I'm not sure it's the panacea that you know, is going to correct the problem that we're facing today.
This is a bit of a broad question, probably a bit Metro Vancouver centric, but Wally and Leonard jump in, all of you jump in if you want. Was shutting down Riverview a mistake?
I think
Huge mistake.
I think everybody now agrees it was a mistake, because at that time there was a resource, a facility where we were able to house people who had mental illnesses, that committed serious crimes. But there was a thinking at the time, I guess, that the best way to treat people was in the community. The problem is the community suffered by virtue of the experiment, and I call it an experiment, that was done at that time to shut down Riverview. I think in 2020 hindsight, I think it was a mistake.
I think, in fairness, the provincial government is moving very slowly towards recognizing it, and it's what, again, I and many others have been calling for a long time. Smaller, community-based facilities for secure and voluntary care so that people aren't separated from their families. They're not punted from Prince George, with great respect, down to Riverview. They still have a family network and support if they have it. It's nearby. And to recognize that, respond to the term panacea. It's not a panacea for everybody, but it's certainly something that is needed, and we move too far. I've said over and over again, no, we all grew up with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Nobody's asking for a return to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Nurse Ratched. But to pretend for a moment that there weren't a number of people who were in secure care, who needed to be in secure care for lengthy periods of time, and that somehow, if you put them back in community with the supports that, as Wally pointed out, were never in place, that they were going to get better, is just silly. And we know it's silly because we've had 30, 40 years of it now, and it hasn't worked. That's why we're all here today.
If I can just respond to the issue further of secure care, we already have that. It already exists in the criminal law context, right? When somebody is charged with a criminal offense and they advise that they're not, you know, criminally responsible because of health issues. So we already have a system that utilizes that. Is the suggestion that secure care would be, you know, that you're suggesting, Mayor, would be something for people not committing criminal offenses?
Often there are criminal offenses involved, but there are many people on our streets who should be in secure care because of their health issues. And to pretend that we continue to leave them on the streets until they die, which is really what's happening, is just ridiculous.
Here's a broad question from one of our guests. Can the current law support a system where a person could choose between prison or drug treatment and rehabilitation?
I think in order to compel someone to seek treatment, and that idea is now being floated around, I think we're talking about involuntary care. And I think we have to move towards that. The Premier made that suggestion a while ago, and I fully agree with that, we always, fundamental to our justice system is that we don't want to take the liberties away from a person without due process. That's what freedom is all about. However, we're talking about the public interest. There are cases now where the interests of that person have to be set aside in order for the public interest, and involuntary care probably is the right way to go.
Adam, I want to ask you a broad question here. You saw it on the news stories. You see it in some of the questions here as well. This underlying anger and frustration that the justice system is not addressing the core issues in a practical way, which is keep our streets safe. Do you worry about, not even long-term, I would say medium-term, challenges to the credibility of the court? I mean, I hear it on our show sometimes. Do you worry about the fundamental credibility of the justice system at the end of the day? Because this cannot continue month after month, year after year. We're here, we're all concerned citizens, but this cannot continue until it permanently undermines our justice system.
That's an excellent question, and I worry about it. I've been in the justice system all my life. And I think that when you look at Western democracies, we have probably the best system in the world. Compare it to what's going on to the south of us, where it's all politicized. The judges are political, the prosecutors, the district attorneys are political. They have wrongful conviction after wrongful conviction, where the police get involved in elections. So from that perspective, when you look at that democracy and look at ours, I think we have a good system. But the fact that you're all here today indicates to me that we have to pay attention to the public voicing their discontents. And so what that means is that we have to change with the times. Right now, I'm sympathetic to the police who have to go out in the streets. In the old days, the police could go out there and talk about how to subdue people who were in violent struggle. Now, the police have to deal with mental illness, they have to deal with homelessness, and all those social issues that we of a society have unfairly cast that onto the police. So yes, I'm worried about the system. As I said, I think it's probably the best because we have police who are not political, we have judges who are not political, prosecutors who are not, and they're doing their best. But as Leonard said, we have to deal with the mental illness that we've agreed, the homelessness, and all those social issues. Those are issues at the front end that impact us at the back end, and the system suffers from a credibility, and if that suffers, then we have to pay attention.
Adam, go ahead.
Absolutely, we're concerned. That's why our association is doing what we're doing. That's why we are trying to get out into the communities. We are trying to listen. That's why we are advocating for our frontline prosecutors. They see what's going on in the court system as well. They know that we are under-resourced. We need more people. We need to reduce these files, the number of files, and we need to reorient the prosecution service towards the front lines and towards communities. I really believe that the answers are going to be found in the communities. They are all very different from what I can see, and we need to make sure that we have the right resources, complement of staff to deliver, to bolster that confidence in the system, because we want it to work, but our people are feeling the exact same frustration as well. They're seeing it right before their own eyes in the courtrooms, and we're trying our very hardest, and so that's why we're here, and that's why we applaud these forums, and we want to be part of them.
Leonard, maybe a bit of a broad question here. We see the challenges here in Vancouver. You've articulated the challenges you have in Nanaimo and throughout British Columbia. You travel, you go down the I-5. I was down in Seattle about a year and a half ago. Similar challenges downtown with stores shutting down. I had friends going down to Portland for a basketball game. They came home a day early because they just did not like what they saw on the streets there in Portland. Travel down to San Francisco further down. You'd hear about the doom loop in San Francisco. LA had similar challenges. What is it at this moment in Western society where we are struggling to deal with the challenges? It's just a question of the potency of the fentanyl? What is it that is causing this collective challenge to society in North America here?
It's all of those things. It's the shutting down of institutional care, which the United States followed suit with, and Canada. 30, 40 years ago, we started with the best of intentions. The right wing loved it because it saved taxpayers' dollars. The left wing thought it was great because, this is about liberty and treating people well, and there were horror stories about some forms of institutional care. We compounded it with the housing crisis, the abandonment of a national housing strategy in the early 90s to balance the budget in response to the cries of reform and debt and deficit. We compound it with the toxic drug supply. We compound it with a lack of support in the school systems for counselors to deal with the problems of children who are showing the early signs of mental health and potentially addiction issues themselves. And we have let this thing slide to the point where you have out in the street the range of everybody from people who are just poor and just need literally housing. I always use the example. The people here from the Nanaimo have heard me say it. 67-year-old female, didn't work outside the home much. She lived in your basement suite. You sold the house. She gets legitimately punted out onto the street now, and she can't afford going from an $800 a month basement suite to a $1,600 or $1,800 a month one-bedroom suite in Nanaimo. So she's in the street. She's homeless too. But at the other end is a 45-year-old severely addicted schizophrenic who hasn't had treatment, who's been ignored to some extent for legitimate and often good-hearted reasons by a court system and a healthcare system. You're a nurse in the hospital, a doctor in the hospital, somebody comes in and starts yelling and screaming and being troublesome. You give them some meds and you punt them back out in the street. There was one instance in Nanaimo where someone who was taken there by the police who would have been committed under the act, as the superintendent of the RCMP told me, they discharged that individual before the police who took him there could get back to their cars. Now that's an extreme example, but my point is nobody wants to touch the hard cases. And it's not about being cruel or nasty, it is about the ultimate compassion. You do not see this in Europe. You do not see it in other parts of the world particularly. You see it in North America in particular, the United States and Canada. They have done just as bad a job as we have, but it's all of those things. And that's why I say it's complex, and the intersection between mental health and addictions that I want to emphasize again, that Wally's a tiny bit senior to me, and our Crown Council is aware of it. Those folks, when numbers were smaller, you know what? Society could kind of ignore it and pat it along. You can't with the numbers anymore, and what COVID did was strip away. It put all of the nice folks in this room in their houses, and the only people left to see were people on the streets.
I think what's going on to the south of us, and I go to San Francisco 2 or 3 times a year to watch baseball and football, that downtown has changed. It's a war zone. So what we need to do is, that should be a lesson for us. We should learn from that, and we need to get proactive. The fact that we're all here, community leaders, and we recognize that there is a problem, ought to be a wake-up call for all of us to get involved in this, because the timelines are short, but we still have time to get back on even keel and start treating those people, the drug-addicted people, the young kids who need help, and then become involved in the criminal justice system. So we need to do that, but we need to do it in a hurry, because we can't keep hearing the discontents and the complaints that we've heard here this morning, because that impacts not only in the criminal justice system, but our society at large.
Here's a question from one of our people listening here. The panel's thoughts on moving charge approval from Crown Council back to the police, as is done in the rest of Canada. Would that improve things?
No. I'll tell you why. Most of the wrongful convictions in Canada come from where the police have laid the charges. I think we have an excellent system here where the police do the investigation and the Crown decides whether there is sufficient evidence that would warrant a conviction, and they authorize the charges. The police are experts in investigating the crimes. The Crown is versed in the law. They know the criminal code better than anyone, and it's up to them to determine whether what the police have given them is sufficient to warrant a charge. And they're the experts in the area, and I don't think we need to disturb. I've heard this comment for a number of years. The first policing inquiry I did in the 90s, and the police wanted to go back to laying their charges. And with all due respect, I think we have the best system of policing in the world, but I think the Crown are the experts in this area.
Adam, here's a question. How can we ensure the Crown collectively learns and then takes public interest into account when administrating prosecutions and administering court resources?
Well, again, I come back to sort of the community model for prosecuting. When I talked about the community court was comprised of the court team, but there was also this other side to the community court, which was representatives from the community, the business community, the Indigenous community, owners. They would inform the court of what's actually going on in their community. What's a problem? Is it car break-ins? Is it this particular type of drug or whatever? That would inform the judge, the prosecutors, the duty counsel, and all of the team at the court about what's sort of unique to that community. And I think that's really where the answer is, and it's bridging that gap and perhaps decentralizing from Victoria and focusing on the Crown, your offices, the Crown offices in your community that serves you, and knowing those prosecutors, knowing that team, and allowing them to build those relationships directly with their community will inform them when they conduct charge assessments, when they have, because the charge assessment standard is, one, is there a substantial likelihood of conviction, and two, is it in the public interest? And the public interest might be different in different parts of the province. But to make that assessment, you need to know your community. You need to have that relationship. And I echo Mr. Opal's comments on charge approval.
Here's another question from one of our folks listening here. Is the result of Leonard's comments that the Mental Health Act needs to be used more frequently?
I'm going to jump in and say, yes, it should. The former minister, I won't mention their name, said to me, but Leonard, we have more people confined under the Mental Health Act in British Columbia than we ever had in our history. And I said, Minister, I have no doubt you're right in terms of the actual number, but I'm not worried about some nice middle-class person like is sitting in front of me today who's going to go back to their family after their 8 weeks when they have a psychotic episode or the mania overcomes them or their manic depression, whatever. I'm not worried. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who are out in the streets who aren't getting care. The Mental Health Act, ours is outdated. The government, I believe, at some point did indicate they were going to review it and look at it. We're out of touch with other provinces. But it does get back to a question of funding, too. There's no sense having a Mental Health Act if you don't have the care and places for people to go to get the care and treatment that they need. And I just want to jump back a bit on the addiction issue. Look, if you just have a simple addict, forcing them into treatment's not going to work. The problem is that we really don't have that many simple addicts anymore. We have people with mental health and brain issue and addiction issues, and that's what creates the greatest social and street disorder, and that's the problem, and that's why I come back to my point again. I am kind of persistent about the interplay between justice and healthcare, and we haven't figured out or haven't done enough to try and make that work in a way that will save people's lives and give them perhaps an opportunity for return to society in a normal way.
If there's one thing you can take away from this panel, it is that there has to be a marriage between the healthcare system and the criminal justice system, because there's no easy line that separates them. The majority of people who are coming into the courts, particularly at 222 Main Street or in Surrey, have some kind of mental issue or some kind of addiction issue which cries out for health intervention.
Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, if I could also jump in here and just say that I think that the wider community could learn some important information or lessons from what the First Nations Justice Council and what the Indigenous communities are doing right now in rethinking criminal justice and in rethinking how we're dealing with the issues that are underlining, the criminality. What we're looking at and what we're providing at our 15 Indigenous Justice Centers across British Columbia is a fulsome wraparound services. We're helping families, we're helping people coming into contact with the criminal justice system, we're providing them with resource workers, and this is not our diversion center, this is our justice center that's providing legal representation plus the wraparound services, referrals for housing issues, referrals for health issues. We're providing aftercare workers and GLADU service workers. And at this moment in time, it's just for the Indigenous people within British Columbia. And what we're seeing is, a reduction in recidivism rate. What we're seeing is healthy people who are going through the system. What we're seeing is balance being restored to the communities. And I think, hearing from my friend at the Crown Counsel office, Adam, the community court system and the bringing together those resources is very similar to what we're doing in the justice system, and is what's working, and I think could be a template for the wider community.
This is a bit of a broad question, but I think it's an important one. We spent a lot of time talking about the justice system, so there is a need for systemic accountability. That I understand. And we're talking about mental health and addiction. Somewhere within there, and maybe this is a bit of a cold question, but should there not be room for individual accountability within this conversation? How can communities evaluate whether those, just the broader conversation in regards to how do we bring that practice in line when it comes to public safety? Because that's the main issue we're all here for. We keep talking about systemic accountability, which is very important, but is there room for individual accountability there as well?
There is. And there is individual accountability. It's happening when a person is facing their community, right? It's happening when Indigenous people are going to First Nations courts. Oftentimes you will hear people who go through Indigenous and First Nations courts saying it's much easier to do, a criminal sentence and go do 16 months, 18 months, then to face their community, then to work on their healing plan, face historical trauma. So I think that that's a really important point. But I also think it's already happening. There are systemic issues that we're coming together to deal with and address, but let's not forget the individual who's going through this system, they are being accountable. There's a lot of loss that they're having to deal with. There's a lot of time and expense, and so I don't think that the community solutions in any way abrogates their personal responsibility.
I asked that question because I hear a lot of that, and I think that has to be part of the conversation, and it's just a layperson's opinion, but I hear a lot of that on my show from a lot of taxpayers. My final question to all of you, and we'll start with you, Wally, first. If there's one change or initiative you could implement tomorrow to address the root cause of mental health, addiction, and public disorder in British Columbia, while restoring public confidence in the justice system, what would it be and why?
I think there has to be some kind of compulsion to have people work together, and because we're still working in silos. And I think one thing we've learned here is the prevalence of mental illness, the healthcare system, which is fundamental to our problems. As I said at the outset of my remarks, we in the justice system only see the incident when the crime's already been committed, victimization, and all of those things. We need to get to the front end and start working together, and that's what we really need to do. There has to be a willpower to get together and to work with kids, people who are vulnerable, people who are addicted, and so that we can prevent the crimes from being committed.
Adam?
Yeah, to build on that, exactly what we're doing, engaging, talking to each other, educating yourself about your prosecution service, your prosecution strength, your criminal justice system, taking the time to go to court, to watch how it's done, to see the system. I know it can be complex, but it's worth it. In order to solve these problems, we need that level of engagement. And when we start to build up that engagement, we get more and more people involved. We can elevate the conversation and try to come up with solutions. So I think that's one important point we need to take away.
Christina.
I think looking at community safety as a holistic approach that looks at health and wellness, also looking at criminal justice and public safety, well people will result in a safer community, balance being restored. I think that's what we need to move forward. And the criminalization of mental health or the increased, calls for stronger and greater increase of criminalization in, pre-conviction incarceration, I'm not sure is the correct way to pursue this initiative. So I think looking at a more holistic way that includes all the community resources that people need will have a more immediate benefit and a greater benefit in effect.
Final word to you, Mr. Krogh.
I hate to say this, but I would have longer sentences, but only on the basis there was treatment available. And we're talking about the criminal justice system only this morning, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to limit it to that in terms of one thing you asked for. Right now, sending people to jail who don't have access to treatment or care is not improving their lives. It doesn't really improve public safety, and it's not going to get us further ahead. The whole range of things we've talked about this morning, I'm not ignoring that, but you asked for one thing. I'll stick to that one thing.
Leonard Crowe, Christina Cook, Adam Dalrymple, Wally Yopel, thank you so much for the conversation this morning. We've got a lot more, of course, throughout the day. Jess, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks very much, Jazz. Well done, even for a kid from Williams Lake. Jazz and I have shared roots in the Cariboo, and we have given each other a bad time about me being from Quesnel and he being from Williams Lake for many years. But thanks again for coming out today and doing this. And to our panel, what a great panel, and some really thought-provoking conversation. And I think that when you get people like this together and you hear directly from them, you start to understand the importance of breaking down those silos and starting to get people to work together, whether it's the health system and the justice system. Well, why can't we figure that out? Why can't we figure that out? So I think that having these conversations are really, really valuable. And plus, when we heard the comparisons or the concerns about other cities down the West Coast and how bad it's getting, I keep thinking that here we are at the Wash Center, beautiful facility. We're in the downtown east side, which people in other parts of the world think that it's the epicenter of the problem. We have some of the best minds in the world here in BC working on issues of addictions and mental health, policing. We have expertise in housing. We have all the expertise in the world. I keep thinking we should be the epicenter of the solution. And I think that thanks. I think that the people in this room have the capacity to have as a goal to become the model for the rest of the world as to how you fix these problems. I'm a little tired of being the model of why it's so bad, right? So I think we can do that. So again, to our panel, thank you very, very much.